Hi, it's Lauren from Lauren Taylor Made, and I'm so excited to be back here on the Scrapbook.com YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be sharing how I created some non-traditional holiday cards using some fun colors and lots of Scrapbook.com goodies. So we're going to be working on our backgrounds first. I've got my flat cards, my star stencil, some gold pigment ink, and lots of pops of colors, as we're going to be stenciling on not only the gold ink, but we're also going to be spreading some of that pops of color through our stencil so we can create some really vibrant cards, as well as have some great texture from that pops of color. And we're going to set up our first flat card. I use my repositional tape to keep that in place, and I've got my metallic board here and some magnets, and we're going to start by ink blending on this gold metallic ink using a foam domed applicator. I think this is such a great way to add color, and this gold pigment ink has this soft shine to it. I just love it. Here we are done, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up the stencil, which is my favorite part about stenciling, is that reveal. And here you can really see that soft shine. I love that it's not an overwhelming gold color, but more of a shimmer. So now we're going to take that stencil as I've cleaned it off, and I'm going to put it back in the same area as I did my ink blending, but I'm going to just kind of off center it just a little bit down to the bottom right. So now when I add my pops of color, which is ocean waves for this first one, I want it to be slightly off-centered so you can still see that gold shine on the top left of the stars. So I have my scraper here, and I'm trying to figure out how I can make sure this is properly staying in place without getting my scraper in the way. I've added some pops of color above where I have the stars in the stencil, and I'm just using my scraper to bring that color down. And then I'm going to use a palette knife that's from my stash. I couldn't tell you how old it is, but I will have linked down below all of the products I use. If it's not exact same, it's something very similar. And I'm just scraping it down and making sure that I have all of my stars colored. We don't waste here in my craft room, so I'm scraping off any of that pops of color, placing it where I see some color is needed in the stars, and then using that scraper to make sure there's a nice even coat for all of those top half of the stars. So now I'm going to repeat the same thing for the bottom, and once my flat card is fully covered with our pops of color here, I'm going to make sure it looks like everything is full, and then we're going to do the reveal again, which this time is super exciting because now we have our texture from our pops of color, and I absolutely love how this has turned out. I love that there's that shimmer because it's kind of a pearlescent blue. And now I'm going to clean everything off because it will stick to your stencil. And I repeated the process using not only blue, but I use clear, I've used orange sherbet, soft pink, and pearl. I absolutely love these different colors, and I think they go really well with this beautiful foiled sheet by Crepe Paper called Snowflake. I love that there are stars, and I tried my best to choose colors from the pops of color that I thought would match really well. And of course we need some cardstock to also go with this paper, and the boho paper pack is just perfect. So I'm going through and selecting colors that I thought would match not only our foiled paper but as well as the pops of colors that I just used on our backgrounds. And I want to use this Lawn Fawn die here. It's one of their rectangle stitch stackables, and I really wanted to add that stitch detail. So in order to cut this out as the paper and the die are the same size, I'm going to use my mint tape to help. I've got my magic mat here. As you can see, it is very well loved, and I'm using some mint tape to create a hinge between my paper and my die. So I've put the tape on the edge of my die, make sure my paper is centered perfectly, as well as perfectly as I can, behind the die, and then go ahead and fold that tape over. I'm going to run it through my die cut machine, and when it comes out you can see it stayed in place, and now I have that stitch detail around my paper, and there is still mint tape on the back which you can pull it off, but it's not going to be seen, so I leave it there. I'm taking the largest of the small stitched stackables from Lawn Fawn, and I'm going to run that through with a sheet of paper on top of my pops of color background just to make sure I don't accidentally get any of that ink onto my die cutting plates. And here you can see the two layers layered, and I've partnered them with a pops of color that I thought would look really well together. But of course, if you know me from my channel, I love adding some splatter and shine. So I'm getting out my splatter box and I'm going to layer a couple of these backgrounds at a time and bring out my gold metallic re-inker. So re-inkers are an excellent way to add your own splatter. I'm going to squeeze some of the color onto this piece of acetate and then spritz on some water to dilute it a little bit. I'm reaching over to grab just a scraggly paintbrush that I have in my stash, mixing the two together and then splattering on that gold onto my background. I definitely think that it adds a little bit more to especially this blue one. You can see now there's more color and more shine onto the card. And I did that for all of the backgrounds. Now it's time for the fun part, and that's fussy cutting these stars out. Now I thought about using my scan and cut just to scan in this background and cut it out, but I found myself just sitting in front of the TV after I cut this one here on camera, and I just watched an episode of my favorite show and fussy cut these stars out, no problem. So here is one, and I came back after watching the episode on Netflix, and I have all of my stars cut out. I'm going to go ahead and sort these stars out by color off camera, and now we're going to move on to our sentiment. I have this adorable stamp set from Scrapbook.com called Merry Little Christmas, and there are so many different stamps here for your holiday cards. I really liked this Happy Holiday wreath, so I die cut some white circles out of my Nina Solar White cardstock, and I'm just going to use my Misty to stamp this on the inside of my white circle. I'm going to be using some dark blue ink. I thought that color would look best with all of the different colors for my 5 note cards I'm making. And so I'm going to be using my Versa Fine Claire in Twilight. I really like this ink for sentiments, especially when there are nice detailed designs like this wreath around the happy holidays. I'm using my Stampendable to help me make sure I have some even pressure, and here is one of those sentiments on my circles. So here we're going to work on our green Starry Christmas card, and the reason why I want to show this is because I accidentally nicked some of my color of my paper off when ripping it out of my boho paper pad. I was excited and ripped a little too fast, so I wanted to share with you how I put this particular card together. I'm using some more of that gold re-inker and a thin paintbrush to paint inside the sentiment, so those pine cones, those little sprigs, as well as the happy holiday sentiment. And while that's drying, we're going to work on arranging the stars. So I want to make sure I have a star covering that piece that was showing of the white core of the smooth cardstock, and I'm just going around and playing with the stars and just placing them in kind of a top left to bottom right fashion, so it looks like the stars are going to be continuing on underneath our circle sentiment as well. So I'm playing around, and yes, I even cut out the stars that were on the edge of that 12 by 12 because they are perfect for edges of our cards or just tucking behind that sentiment where you're not going to see the whole star anyway. So like I said, I don't waste. I like to make sure I use everything as I can to really make my cards happy and shiny. So now that I have the placement of the stars how I like them, I'm just going to use my Smart Craft glue to start gluing these stars down. So I'm going to start with my top left. I've got that large star, and then I'm going to keep going and adding glue and layering these stars on top of each other. So I start with the stars that will be more towards the back because you'll be gluing the stars on top of it. And I'm going to keep going with the top left stars, and then I'm going to move on to the bottom right. And I will be tucking in some of those smaller pieces underneath where my sentiment will be adhered down. And because I'm using wet glue, it gives me that few extra seconds to make sure everything is placed where I want it to be. You'll see coming up that I'll have to kind of wiggle around one of my stars to cover up my little paper boo-boo. And if it was tape runner or any other type of dry adhesive, I might not have been able to wiggle that star around. So wet glue is perfect for gluing down items like this. Now I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foam tape to apply my sentiment to the center, kind of top center of my card. I like it a little bit more towards the top when it comes to a sentiment like this. And I went ahead and pressed that down. And as you can see here, one of my stars is kind of hidden. So I'm just moving that around a little bit to put it in a better spot. Now we're going to trim off any of the excess stars except for the two largest in the corners. I want the rest of my stars to be flush with this smaller rectangle. And then I'm going to use my same wet adhesive to adhere this background to my cardstock. So this is going to fit perfectly centered onto that green cardstock. And similar to the stars, using wet glue gives me a couple extra seconds to wiggle things around if needed. And here you can see that white paper is still showing, so I'm going to pull up that star because the glue isn't totally dry yet, and I'm able to just kind of twist it and cover that white spot on the green paper. And now I'm going to trim these stars to match the edges of the green cardstock in the background. And now that that is done, you can see our almost finished card. I absolutely love how these are turning out. And I am loving the green with the gold, and I'm so excited to share with you the rest of the combos. I brought back out that orange sherbet pops of color, and I'm just adding a few spots around the stars. And I like to tap on the back behind the pops of colors, even flick it to really kind of round out those drops. And now we are going to adhere it to a card base. I absolutely love the top folding vertical card bases sold from Scrapbook.com. And I'm going to use that wet glue to adhere this to my card base. I like to use the corner of my MISTI when I have the same size papers being glued together. So I just made sure that they are perfectly centered on top of each other. And now for the fun part of sharing with you all of the color combos. So here is that gold and blue. We have clear and blue, that gold and green. We have the pearl and pink, and then pink with the darker pink stars. And I absolutely love how these cards have turned out. I love the shine. I love the stars going from the top to the bottom corner. And I love how they're clustered together on the cards. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that you try some of these techniques yourself on your Christmas cards this July. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day.